Welcome to the Get Unhooked podcast with Jason Coombs, where experience meets insight. Jason Coombs, nationally recognized speaker, best-selling author, and founder of Brickhouse Recovery, shares hard-earned lessons on resilience, leadership, addiction, and mental health. No filters, no fluff, just real stories, practical wisdom, and a deeper look at what it takes to grow, lead, and keep moving forward. Now here's your host, Jason Coombs.
Hey, welcome back to this is one of a few podcasts in a series that really is directed to my experiences at Warrior Heart, but I like to frame it more in the sense of what women and men need to know about men. And what's cool about Warrior Heart is there's also a female boot camp or retreat where women go that we might get into and talk about it at some point. But today is a really exciting episode for me, and I gotta believe this is going to be very exciting for each one of the listeners out there. You guys are learning some things that have helped me in my recovery take the next step. As I've mentioned, once you first get sober, the reality is there are highs and there are lows all along the journey. And what can happen is it gets stale. One of the suggestions that I often share with my clients and with people in early sobriety or those that are kind of at that low or plateau, a year in, maybe it's 18 months in, maybe it's 5 years in, maybe it's 10 years in. I've had people have setbacks at 14 years that were at a low. And so how do you keep it fresh? How do you stay motivated? How do you continue to grow up in not only emotional sobriety, but how can you feed the spiritual man or woman inside? I'm particularly talking about feeding the spiritual man inside today. And today I have a guest that is a gentleman that I admire and I've come to love and to get very close to as we have worked together over the last 3 or 4 years. Since my first introduction to him at the Warrior Heart Boot Camp. And this is a men's retreat that is not therapy. It's not a conference, not a summit for business. It's an opportunity for men to come together and disconnect from the world, disconnect from technology, and drop in, as we say, drop in from our heads and our busy lives and stress of things we have to get to all of our to-do lists and to step into deep reflection and contemplation through a series of presentations. But the magic is in these vows of silence where we connect with God, we connect with our maker, and we ask big questions and we check in with where am I in my life? And am I happy where I am? And where do I want to go? Who do I want to become? Am I living in my largest potential or in my larger story as the Warrior Heart message talks about? Or am I living small? Am I staying in my smaller story? Am I stuck in a label? Am I an addict? Is that all I see myself as? Is just someone with an addiction? A smaller story could look like, I'm a salesperson in my job, and this is my title, or I am a CEO of a business, and that's who I am, or I am a coach to my kids' basketball, and that's all I do. That's what my world is right now. And that would be an example of a smaller story. And I like to just put the context out there that It's not a bad thing to live in the moment and be focused on priorities, if it's coaching or if it's business or if it's recovery. And, addiction recovery is like the primary focus at the time. The risk is that if we stay there and we don't have the bigger vision and don't have the bigger understanding of who we are, what our identity really is, and to get those core desires met. And those core desires are, every man needs a battle to fight for their heart to feel alive, an adventure to live, and a beauty to love. Those are the three core desires of a man's heart. And if we aren't in a battle to fight in a spiritual sense, fighting against the opposition, fighting against the disease of addiction, fighting against our selfishness, fighting against our natural man, fighting against the enemy, really, then what we end up doing is we begin to find other battles to fight that hurt others, and adventures to live that are really more about thrills, not true adventures with God. Thrills like, this next adventure is I'm going to try getting high. I'm going to try drinking. I'm going to try this risky behavior, because we seek these adventures, right? And we need something to light us up, to excite us, to keep us alive. And many times we are, as men, we get dormant. You walk into a church these days and you might see most of the men hunched over, looking like they're barely awake or on their phones, and are totally checked out. Now, no judgment here. I just am painting a picture is what I'm trying to do. And is it safe to say that maybe their battle is unclear, and maybe they're living in their smaller story, and maybe their adventure is their job and that's it? And so they're just burning the candle at both ends, chasing this adventure that is not fulfilling. And so by the time they, get home, they're checked out. They're checked out of their relationships with their kids, their families, their spouses. And that's where a lot of people will turn to porn. That's where a lot of people will turn to alcohol or gaming or electronic heroin or whatever, and shopping, whatever that looks like. And I think it's very interesting to look at what happens to a man that's in that space at these boot camps that lights them up to a larger story, to consider what that is. And part of that process, before you even get to considering the larger story, it's identifying some of the ways that we show up with no judgment, but with just love, like recognizing that each one of us have a gap in our hearts, and learning that fatherlessness is that void that our mortal fathers couldn't step in and fill. And every man, we need to feel loved by our mortal fathers, and we need to feel validated by our heavenly Father, by God. And when we are missing that from our mortal fathers in some form or fashion, or if there's a way that he's not stepping in to father us in any sense, which no father's perfect, so we all have fatherlessness as young boys, and as we grow up. And my son, Raiden, he has fatherlessness. Like, he experiences fatherlessness, even though I'm trying 100% to be there for him, to do everything. But there are things that I can't meet inside his heart and in his life, which is the design, because that message is to turn to the Father that can father him, which is his heavenly Father, which is God. And in that space, we recognize that there's wounding that happens. And wounding throughout our lives. Some men have much deeper wounds than I had growing up. Most of my wounds came, I think, as an adult in my addiction and the lifestyle that I lived, and homelessness and jail and divorce and placing my son for adoption, my oldest, and the wounding that happened in those settings. But others have experienced abuse and traumas from young age. And anyway, addressing those wounds at these boot camps is really like an introspection, not a, hey, let's open up and talk about this in a group setting. But that leads to what I want to introduce with my guest here. Duane Crabtree is like, what do men do with those wounds typically? And with that fatherlessness. And that's where we mask, we pose, we create these alter egos. And mine was, you become an egomaniac with an inferiority complex, is how I've heard it said. But I want to introduce this great man, Duane Crabtree. Duane Crabtree he has a phenomenal history and success in his business career as a salesperson, as a leader in sales, and an executive in sales, and he's led many companies and organizations to great success in that realm. And that's not why I'm bringing him on. Why I'm bringing him on is because this humble man, this warrior, is he is so involved on the executive level and the board of directors of Warrior Heart that he has shaped these experiences for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of men each year to come alive and to transform. And he knows he's an agent in God's hands. He knows that it's not about him. But Duane, I want to welcome you to the Get Unhooked podcast and just let you know how grateful I am for your impact and your presentations that specifically about what we're going to talk about right now, which is the poser. And then if we can get into some of the other topics, that would be great with the time that we have. But
thanks, welcome. Jason. I'm excited to be here. And if I may, I heard you kind of introducing these events that we do. And I think I like to just kind of simplify it when I explain to somebody what this Warrior Heart Boot Camp weekend is about. And for me, I like to just keep it simple. And it's a 3-day experience to come and sit with God and really just feel immersed in his love and be surrounded by his love and the love of other men, which fosters some of those experiences you're talking about, that we can show up and be authentic and genuine with each other, because you just feel that love, and it's a safe place to come and just be yourself and to let go of all the faking that we do as men and all the hiding that we do as men, and just be real, because we're around a bunch of other people that are willing to be vulnerable and just bask and feel his love in such a deeper, more intimate way, whether that's the men's Warrior Heart Boot Camp or the women's event that you mentioned, the Heart of a Woman retreats are the same experience, to just come and immerse yourself for 3 days in God's love and unplug from our normal worldly daily cares.
When and how were you introduced to this message of Warrior Heart?
So I found out about Warrior Heart Boot Camps. I was seeing Todd Olson at Lifestar, and he was one of the original founders of the Warrior Heart Boot Camps in Utah. So he and a couple of other therapists had gone to a John Eldredge event. Obviously, John Eldredge wrote the book Wild at Heart. He's really the godfather of this experience, and wrote an amazing book about how to bring men's hearts alive again and rediscover a man's soul and heart that gets lost in the heaviness and the hardship of this mortal journey. It's hard. So anyways, Todd Olson started these in 2009. I was seeing him. I was in a group therapy session with some other amazing men that I've had such incredible friendships with. But Todd invited us, and my friends Chris Bennett and Jim Gilman, who've been part of Warrior Heart from the beginning as well, just really encouraged me to come and have this experience. So I went initially in 2010, and had a powerful experience, and went, a number of other times over the next 4 or 5 years. Took my brother, took some friends, took some other family members to share in these experiences. And then in 2016, Todd asked me to help on the back end and help with the administration and help run these events, as they had another gentleman that was stepping away and moving away. So I kind of came in as operations director, executive director for Warrior Heart, and it's been just amazing over the last 9 years to have these amazing experiences and see, and just to be with God in this journey of helping men see how much He loves them, and seeing men's hearts change, and the way that it changes their lives to just understand how much God really loves them right where they are, no matter what they've struggled with, no matter what mess life has brought them, what pains, what wounds they have, to just really see that love of God. And it's just been a choice, amazing experience. And again, it's nothing that I do. It's all God that does the heavy lifting. And just as men show up, we're fortunate to be able to help facilitate these experiences and help men to just feel that love so deeply.
Now, you don't have to answer this. But I have to ask, because people might be wondering, you mentioned that you were a part of a therapy group that introduced you to Warrior Heart. Were you struggling with something specific that you would be comfortable sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's part of my story and part of why, I think if we're not honest and authentic about the struggles we have, it's hard to really heal and see the power of redemption and restoration and healing if we can't be honest about that. But I've struggled with a pornography addiction for most of my adult life, and just some compulsive behaviors. And that's one obvious. I struggle with overeating. I struggle with, compulsive lying because I want to look good to other people. And as we get into the poser, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But just this constant need for validation and trying to hide that pain and the struggle that I had that was really impacting relationships, cost me a marriage, because I was just so stuck in myself and my own head and letting lust and compulsive desires, compulsive behaviors run my life.
It is so hard for me to picture you as someone who's dishonest, because I've known you for a long time, and you are one of the most honest, transparent, beautiful men that I know with integrity. and to picture you as someone that's plagued by compulsive behaviors and sexual compulsivity is hard for me to picture, because I've only known you in this state of recovery, which is really, congratulations on your recovery and your progress. Now tell us a little bit. You mentioned, that's where the poser comes in. Here you were struggling. You're introduced to this message. How did the poser show up for you, and what would you describe that most men deal with as the poser? Because a lot of the men that are sitting there in those boot camps, when you speak and bring up the poser, I gotta believe there were quite a few that were like, they must be talking about, like, he's talking to all these other men. Like, I don't pose. I don't have a pose.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned that, because when I was asked to give a presentation the first time on the poser session, I went through some of my original notes from the first boot camp I went to, and I wrote that I don't know if this session really relates to me, because I don't see where my posing is showing up, and I didn't fully understand it. But as I went to subsequent events and really got real with God and myself and other brothers and that I've opened my heart to, I could see that's the trick, and it's a trap that we just want to look good. I was stuck in this pose of being this nice guy with no problems, and I have a comfortable life. I have a lot of good things going in my life, and it's easy just to hide. And most men hide a lot of stuff. We hide our pain, we hide our flaws, and most men honestly are faking it. We're showing up, and yes, it's okay to let those parts come through, but the problem is we're living this life that's so focused on validation from others that we're completely faking it. We want to be liked, we want to be loved, And we think if people knew those dark side of me, or even just whatever struggles I'm going through, whether it's in my marriage or in my family or with behaviors or the way I show up in other places or the way I hide and the things I do on my own time, if anybody knew that stuff, they wouldn't like me. So I got to put forth this persona. And so most of us fake it because we want to be loved and noticed, and we do everything for validation. And so we just hide all that other stuff. And unfortunately, it leads to this emptiness and this, we think that if people see our flaws and weakness, that they're not going to like us. And that, and I've seen life in a whole different way over the course of being, trying to step away from that and being real and being genuine. And I see how much more love and compassion and connection I can have with somebody when I can take off that mask, when I can step away from that, hiding it, and I can be open with somebody. I have friendships that I never imagined were possible when I started in therapy and recovery. And in those early days, I was so lonely, even though I'd go to church or go to work and have success at work and people think I got it all together. But I was a lonely, miserable, struggling man who had no real deep friendships. Because I show up faking it.
It reminds me of that song by Matthew West where he says, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine, but I'm not. And you know it.
Yeah.
As he's talking to God in that. You brought up a question that you were asking yourself, like, where does my post show up? And some of the other questions that you asked in that session are, how would you describe yourself as a man? How do you often pose? What parts of your life are you afraid of exposing? What does it look like to be your true self around others? What do you want God to address about your pose? And how do you seek validation from others? And then you went into like the two questions that every man asks or wants to know. Am I the apple of your eye? Yeah. And do I have what it takes? And am I the apple of your eye? Why those two questions?
Well, those are two questions. John Eldridge kind of pointed those out, and yeah, there's some other similar questions. But when we take those questions to other people, do I have what it takes? Do I matter to you? Am I enough for you? Especially in intimate relationships and romantic relationships or family relationships. But we weren't designed to take those questions to a woman or even to another man. And I see some people that do it to their children and like take those questions to their children. Hey, do I matter to you? And they're like, we need to go find those questions and take those questions to God. Because when we take those questions to other people, yeah, they'll answer them at times, but that leads to our faking it. That leads to our posing or pretending or faking it, because we'll start put forth that false self, because that false self sometimes looks better than a flawed man who's struggling with compulsive behaviors or who's sometimes just lazy or selfish. And we all struggle with laziness and selfishness at times in our lives. But if I want to know, and I go take that question to the wrong source, it's great when I get the right answer, and I get the right answer more when I'm faking it or putting together this rosy, the pretty side of myself. But when I put together the other side of me, I'm thinking there's no way I'm going to get that. But I want that validation. I want to be liked. So I'm only going to tell you the good parts of me because you're probably going to like me more. That's what we think. So we try to outdo each other. We belittle other people. We minimize our flaws and over exaggerate our good parts and our successes and our good things, because we think and so that's where it leads to faking it, because we want to matter so bad. We want that validation so bad that we put this false self forward, and it gets messy. And then in our heart of hearts, when we're back on our own again, it's like, oh, those guys like me, but they like the faking at me. If they knew the real me, I don't know if they'd really like me, because we're so concerned with that validation and getting that shot of validation that we're afraid to be real.
Yeah, it's really easy to spot a poser if they're loud on social media, or if they, pose as the self-made man. Look at me, they got all the, all the trucks, all the toys, the big house, or they're posing at church in the suit, wearing the, and they're holier than thou. It's easy to spot those people. It's easy to spot the opposite in. Not the opposite, but the women that do it as well in those realms. The other side of that is, think of all the men that aren't on social media, that are not out there. The bravado isn't their pose, but it's in silent, isolated addiction, because seeking validation and getting those two questions answered in pornography.
Yeah. And that's a big thing. Cause in my marriage, I've got to really show up for my wife and love her if I want the intimacy I'm looking for. But, and it's hard. We all know marriage is hard, and romantic relationships are hard because you've got to keep showing up every day. But when I go to pornography, man, the answer is always yes. Yes, she's always available for me. I can turn to her anytime, and she's ready for anything I want and her to be, and I don't have to do anything, and there's no interaction, so it's all fake. But then we're expecting that in our marriage, and it's not the same. Love is not physical intimacy. Love is working and being patient and being honest. I mean, that's the place. It's really hard to pose long-term in marriage. You can do it for a little while, but it comes out. The dirt comes out. The mess comes out. And in a marriage, or when you have that intimate relationship and they find out, you got to figure out how to get through that. And some people never fully get through that because they can't be authentic in that. But we need to be. And you talk about the self-made man, and the problem with the self-made man and this over boasting and the over focus on all the good things I do is it doesn't leave much room for God. We don't need God if we got life all figured out. And you even talk about the church pose. We know guys at church that look like they got it all together, but they're saying all the right things. But do they really have a close, intimate relationship with God? Or are they just checking all the boxes and doing all the stuff to look good for everybody else because they want the validation? One of my other big poses was the nice guy pose. I mean, the nice guy looks like such a good guy, but I do everything. And I got stuck in that for a long time. And I'm finally recognizing, hey, I don't need to be everything for everybody. And I read the book, No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover, a great book. If you've seen this, and and I know it scares some of the women in our lives when we read that, because wait, you want to go be a jerk? No, it's not about that. It's about having boundaries and understanding what my heart needs, and knowing that sometimes it's okay to say no because my heart needs something else. And I don't have to. And I also looked at, when you look at the nice guy, and the whole focus of this nice guy persona that I put on for so many years of my life was to look good to other people. And I didn't want to do stuff. And sometimes it leads to resentment because you're doing so many nice things for everybody, but my heart needed some other things sometimes. And I'm still a pretty nice guy, but when somebody asks me to do something, I'll pause and take time and say, hey, let me get back to you so I can kind of just self-evaluate. Am I doing this because it's something I really want to do? Or am I doing this to be noticed and liked and get that validation and notice that I wanted from others?
And covering up for the secret, covering up for whatever I'm doing that I don't want exposed.
Right. Yeah.
And that is the whole layer that, whether it's drugs, alcohol, pornography,
sure,
any addictive, compulsive behavior, it seems to me like a lot of us, because I've struggled also with sexual compulsivity. I don't talk a lot about that side in my work with Unhooked, and it's not mentioned very often in Unhooked, if at all. And a big part of that, I think, is I'm trying to find that Goldilocks zone to respect my my wife and my daughter, who they didn't know me during that time. My wife, my first wife, and I divorced over a lot of that stuff. So I'm trying to still find my voice in that area, although I'm wide open about it. And, on Unafraid, Unashamed podcast, told my story there. So I bring that up because a lot of times it's coupled with the nice guy, like not just sexual compulsivity, but the compulsive overeating. I've struggled with that as well. The cross addictions, and so I'm glad that you touched on the Mr. Nice Guy, because I think a lot of us can show up that way to just like deflect, like, don't look here, don't look, there's nothing here that you need to know. But I love that the poser sets up a beautiful question mark about the one of the three core desires of a man's heart, which is a beauty to love. Why is that so important? And also thinking about, we naturally jump to, okay, this is about our wives only, but that's not the case when it comes to beauty.
Can I circle back before we kind of transition to that? Because I do want to just kind of say, we talk about the pose, but really what we need to do, and if we can take those questions to God and find our validation and our value and our self-worth and understand our true identity, get that from God, then we can show up and be authentic and genuine and be okay to talk about our mess and talk about our messy lives. I mean, we see it in Scripture. I love Paul. Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh, and he tries to go to God to get it taken away. But God says, Christ said, my grace is sufficient and your weakness makes you strong. And so he's okay that he's weak and he's struggled and he's had sin and flaws, because if we can be okay with that and be okay to talk about that, the connections we can have, and that's what I've found in my own life, when I can show up and be okay to talk about my compulsive behaviors and my flaws and my brokenness, and be okay to be wounded and messy, because we're all going through a mess. And man, when I can show up and know who I am and know my identity comes from God, I can show up better in my friendships, in my relationships with my kids, and my relationships with my wife, because I don't need to go to them for strength. I get my strength from God, and then I can find connection and brotherhood in the friendships with other men in ways that I never knew was possible. And sometimes we're posing because of the woundedness that we have. I mean, we all have wounds. You talked about wounds in your intro, and that's why some of us go into that pose, because we're broken, wounded little boys and girls that have had a really hard, messy life. But when we can find that strength and healing, we've got to go be okay to talk about those, because we're never going to heal from them if we don't talk about them. But then when we can really open up our heart and take those to God and quit hiding that little boy or little girl inside of us that's so broken and wounded, we can find connection and strength in ways that we never knew. So sometimes when our pose does get exposed, even if when we're not doing it ourselves, whether it's, when we hit rock bottom in an addiction, and, for some that's going to jail. For me, it was my divorce. My first wife left me after 4.5 years because of my compulsive behaviors. And then a few years later, and being sexually active, I got excommunicated from my church. Those were disruptions in my life and really hard chapters to go through. But I'm okay talking about those things, because those things helped me go back to God. And even though those were hard, painful times, it helped me find a relationship with God and find some healing and some connection, and understood that, hey, God still loves me completely, even though the world around me is messy and hard. And when I can trust in him, I can show up and not need other people to make me whole, that I can go become whole with God and live authentically and show up with more purpose and strength in my relationships. So even though I'm flawed and I'm broken, I'm okay to admit it because I know I have a Savior who's redeemed me, and his grace is sufficient for me too. And he makes me who I am. And the fact that we can be broken and wounded and be made whole again is the beautiful part of that redemption story. Amen. That can then spill over into our other relationships and make us stronger and better.
The healing. So the how, now what? We got the pose. We become aware of the pose, and then it's like, well, now what? And I'm so grateful that you touched on the healing, because once we remove the pose, then we're left with that brokenness and that wound or wounds. Yeah. And then we're able to allow the feel it to heal it, as I talk about in Unhooked, and go through that process.
And I love that you were willing to share your story and be so vulnerable, because that's a powerful, powerful story. Reading your story in Unhooked and hearing you share your story in your podcast and in other places, it's seeing what's happened with you and your story it's just another reminder that, hey, it's okay to talk about our flaws and our weakness, because what a remarkable story of redemption and renewal and new beginnings that we all get. Everybody gets it, no matter where anybody's at listening to this. In your mess and your messiness in your life, it's okay, because there is a way through it.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to just point out something that can be controversial in times that I have brought this up, and but I stand behind it, and it is my experience, and that is that, well, in order for me to heal, I had to recognize that my pose was also a friend during times where I don't think I would still be alive if I didn't have it to survive. A couple of examples: when I was homeless, for example, and when I was incarcerated, had the ego not protected me, I just wouldn't be here. And as I went through some EMDR and processed that, I had to shift my thinking from seeing those parts of me as defenders that were covering my wounds, and to overcome them, it was thanking the defenders for doing their job when I was so broken. Yeah. And then giving them permission to not do that any longer, because I have a bigger defender and I'm turning to that higher power. And that was a very powerful process for me.
I think that's a real thing, because sometimes the wounds are so big that it's survival. I mean, we got to put up these defense mechanisms for survival. And that's what I've loved about the Warrior Heart boot camp experiences. It takes amazing men and God to come and, hey, let's walk through this together, and let's help look at this in a different way. But sometimes it's just survival. There's hard things, and your story, I don't know if I could have survived that story. I mean, my story is messy and filled with hardships and pain from, my family of origin. There was some messiness and chaos and hard things where I didn't always feel loved in this big family, but it still led to some wounding. But then I see other people that have gone through horrific things that I couldn't imagine that I didn't go through. But regardless of where the pain comes from, sometimes it's just a defense mechanism. We put up this pose because we can't face that pain until we have somebody help us through it. And I hope that if you're going through any pain and messiness, that go get some help and reach out to others, because there is help available for it.
Yeah. And, I couldn't survive my story either. There's no reason I should be alive, from the overdoses to the car accidents to other things. And I think back to why he did, why God preserved me long enough to then get into recovery. And I know that's not everybody's story, and I don't know the rhyme or reason why I'm here today and others are not, but I'll spend the rest of my life in his service to share this message of hope, that even the most wretched of us can have full, not just recoveries, but full change of heart to pursue good and to do good and to want to give and share good with the world. And that is what I will spend the rest of my life doing. And a big part of that too is like, okay, a lot of my pose had to do with unhealthy relationships with God's daughters. God's daughters. That's a Spoonerism. God's daughters. And as I live in my larger story today, a big part of that is how I treat my wife, how I show up for her, and also how I show up for my daughter and my sons. But particularly, I think about my daughter and what kind of a man is she perceiving who's raising her? Am I checked out? Am I emotionally unavailable? Am I present? Am I interested? Am I emotionally honest? Am I interested in her feelings and validating to those feelings? And I think the cherry on top, or maybe the ribbon that kind of brings the whole experience of the message together for me when I go to the retreat, but also when I'm just living in the message, is I know if I'm in my larger story, if my daughter and my wife and my kids are a high priority of battling for their hearts and showing up for them in very real ways. And that is another session that you went deep into that I've learned so much from you. But you know, a beauty to love, like seeking validation from women most of my life. If I give them the power to validate me, then I give them the power to invalidate me. And that was the case.
But it's an easy place to pose, because that validation seems like so critical. Like as a man, we got to be loved by the woman. We got to look good to her. We need her to make us whole. And we get that kind of confused and messed up. So we go to her the wrong way. And she needs to know who we are and in our heart, because that matters to her a lot.
What are some ways that you battle for your beauty?
Thanks for asking. I think there's one thing to understand about a woman and her heart is, I'll just kind of mention the book Captivating. That's the Heart of a Woman Retreat is based off the book Captivating. And one thing we need to understand first off and foremost is a woman's core desires are not the same as a man's. We got to break those apart. And, you know, we learn at the Word Heart Boot Camp what the men's 3 core desires are: a battle to fight, and an adventure to live, and a beauty to love. But women's core desires are different. The women's core desires, the first one is to be romanced. She wants to be longed for. She wants to be loved. She wants to be chosen. She wants to be fought for. So that's to be romance. She wants to have an irreplaceable role in a great adventure. That's a little different than ours, just needing to have adventure in our lives. They want to be needed. They want to be essential. And they really they want to be irreplaceable. And that can happen with us, or it can happen in other ways. But and she's not our adventure or our project. You know, we used to call it, and I think even John Eldridge initially called it a beauty to rescue, but it's not about rescuing her. And so that language has changed and he's updated that. And so we call it's a beauty to love. It's not about rescue, because she doesn't need to be rescued. She needs to be loved and needs to be important. And then her third core desire, so the first, to be romanced, to have an irreplaceable role in a great adventure, and then to unveil beauty is the third one. And she's got a beauty that and this is not in a sexual way, this is in a beauty, seeing her beauty inside. She's got beauty inside and out. And doesn't matter what she looks like. Women have this beauty and allure. I mean, there's a reason, and it's gotten twisted in our society and through our enemy that's twisted and tainted this to make it all sexual. But they want to be noticed and captivating in the depths of their heart and let that beauty be unveiled. So when I can let my wife know and try to understand what does her heart need, not what do I need, because we often approach those romantic relationships from this self-serving, from the sexuality side of what I want is her job is to fulfill me. And that's not what her job is. And I can't have a good relationship if that's my whole focus. It's about having the right kind of intimacy, and there's different kinds of intimacy. It's not all, we all think about intimacy as sexual, but the intimacy, there is the physical component of intimacy, but there's also an emotional intimacy that my wife needs, that's where the vulnerability and the trust. And if I'm in my pose, I can't show up that way. I've got to be willing to talk about my flaws and my struggles. And when I learned to do that, I mentioned I was divorced and went through a divorce after 5 years of marriage when I was young. I got married at 21, was divorced with 2 kids when I was 26. But I went through a messy time of being a single dad and struggling in my pose and my addiction for 12 years. I was this broken man trying to figure life out and I was stuck in that place of needing a woman to make me whole. And it wasn't in a place to show up with this emotional intimacy. But I met a wonderful, beautiful woman. We met in 2006. We got married in 2009. So we've been married 16 and a half years now. And it's a messy, rocky relationship that is beautiful and lovely and wonderful because we're okay that we're broken. And our favorite song is Casting Crowns, Broken Together, because we've learned to talk about our brokenness. And for those of you, most of you are coming from a place of understanding 12 steps and addiction recovery. But when I met Alyssa, we started dating online. And before we ever went on a date and physically met, I shared with her over numerous conversations. She asked the right questions. I shared with her my whole first step inventory before we ever went on a first date. I don't know that's the right path for everybody, but for us, it started our relationship based on this trust and understanding and vulnerability. And so we had that emotional intimacy before we ever met. Her divorce was just waiting to be finalized when she jumped online. So some of that came because she wanted to honor that. And so we didn't start dating until that was final, but it gave us a chance to really get to know each other at a deeper level. And so other types of intimacy, there's intellectual intimacy, where we have curiosity and we take time, we try to learn from each other. What lights up their heart and their mind, and what are the things that they like to learn about, or what are they curious about? We need to be more curious about each other and not make judgments because somebody does something different, and just be curious. Like, wow, tell me about those thoughts that you have. My wife is a math teacher. She's a junior high math teacher, and I like math, but she just gets passionate and excited about math. And sometimes I just let her talk about it because she loves talking about it. She loves finding new ways to learn, and she gets into some of these math mindsets, and it lights her up. But it's fun to see her excitement and when she has the opportunity to teach somebody and help somebody learn that way. And then there's the spiritual
boot camp. Yeah, I was just going to say, at boot camp, I love how you touch on so many of the areas where intimacy is important, from spirituality to emotional intimacy and social intimacy. Of course, the physical you touched on, and the intellectual. And I want to just point this out to those that are listening, that the female core desires, Duane, in fact, men didn't just make those up and say, yeah, this is the female core desires.
All right.
These are influenced by research, and you may push back on some of those, but I've found those to be accurate. Romance and have an irreplaceable role in a great adventure, and to unveil their beauty, their innermost selves, which is basically sharing their hearts. Sharing who they really are and the beauty that they have. And I think battling for the hearts of my daughter and my wife have been the fruits of attending these Warrior Heart boot camps. There have been so many other benefits, and I could go down the list, from my own identity to my relationship with God and my fellowship with you and Chris, Doug, the executive team, the men at Warrior Heart, and on, which keep me coming back as well. But every time I'm about to leave for boot camp, my daughter's like, "Why do you have to leave again? You just got, I just came back from a work trip, and I have to travel for work often, and to leave again, to go on a man's camp, like some people call it." I let her know. I say, I'm going because when I come back, I'm going to be a better father and a better husband. Mm-hmm. And that's my first priority. And then she'll say, "Well, then just stay. And I said, I want to. But when I come back, there's always warfare. There's always the spiritual battles. There's always the things we face when we come off that mountain and that high, and we can get distracted easily. But what I love is the refocus on family, the refocus on our beauty. And so for all of the Unhooked nation, the Unhooked community, the outcome of nudging your husbands or your brothers or sons or fathers or men in your life to attend one of these boot camps is that we come home invigorated to fight for our beauties above everything else, in my experience, and to build a closer connection with God. And so we do come home better men. We come home better fathers, better husbands. And sometimes that is the very thing people need to hear, to nudge their loved ones, their husbands, to go on these things. Because if it's just another 3-day man camp to get away and they come back while you're carrying the bag, holding all the responsibilities, and nothing's changed, then it's kind of just another burden. But these boot camps have been a staple in my life over the last few years because of many reasons, but that being the number one is my passion to fight for my beauties.
Yeah. And let me I know we're probably getting long on time here and probably need to wrap up, but I'll just, that one thought, and kind of really just answering that question and finishing the question that you asked me. What does it look like to battle for your wife? And when I first had the opportunity to teach this session, I asked my wife that question. And it says, "What does it look like when I'm battling for your heart?" And she teared up just that I would ask that question. So for those of you men out there, it's a good question to ask your beauty. But some of the things she said to me, she says, "I love when you're okay that we have different needs." Like for example, and when you'll take time to listen, when you're vulnerable. But being okay to have different needs. I'm a very connected, family. We have a big extended families, and I love to entertain and have people over and get family get-togethers. But there's times that she just needs some quiet downtime, and even if my family's over, sometimes she just needs to go in her room and rest and can't be entertaining like I am, because my needs are different. I have these social desires. I love to be around people, and she values that quiet. And she says, when you honor that, and when I hear you, when your family's over, and I hear you defending me, that, hey, she just needs some rest. And there's no victim mode in it, but she loves when I do that and say, "I love that you're okay, that we have different needs." But she also says, the other things that she said is when I give her space for a trauma response, because I've wounded her too. I mean, I've struggled in my in my addiction and my compulsive behaviors and just, my flawed life. I make mistakes and I've hurt her in some big ways. But when I give her space to have a trauma response, because sometimes there's something where she's questioning, hey, are you struggling again? Have you, I stepped out on my wife and I had gone to some massage parlors when I got caught up in my addiction and lust and compulsive behaviors. And that hurt her to the core. So when she asks the question, I don't get defensive and I don't get in this defensive place and angry. Like, I thought we already worked through that. That's in the past. But no, she says, so what I've learned to do is just acknowledge my part, say, hey, I'm sorry. I put you in a place to not trust me sometimes. And I want you to know that I'm here and I'm being authentic. And if you need to look at my phone, if you need to ask any questions, if there's anything you need that will help you feel safe. But I don't go into a victim mode myself. And sometimes that happens when someone has a trauma response, we want to get defensive. But she says, you honor that and you recognize that she says, that means a lot to me when you can just say, hey, I know I put you in a place that I hurt you in the past. And I allow her to have the other thing. She says, when I give her time to rest, because I'm a go, and sometimes she wants that downtime. But it's also when I allow her to have imperfections and be okay with her flaws, because I'm flawed and broken and she loves me dearly and I love her dearly. And that's why we're able to be broken together. And so for those of you listening, I hope if you're a man or if you've got a man in your life, we hope to see them at a Warrior Heart boot camp at some point. And if you're a woman, love to hear your experience or just invite you to go to the Heart of a Woman retreat and look at that, or read the book Captivating by Stacey Eldridge. John and Stacey co-wrote that together. So beautiful things that we can do better in showing up for each other and being more authentic and coming to my beauty from a place of strength, because I'm getting my validation from God and not relying on her to make me whole.
And we'll add the links to the show notes for these resources. But yeah, I feel like after this interview, at the time it's being recorded, I'm going to go do something to battle for my beauties. I've got a couple of ideas because I have to leave town again for a work conference, and I was just thinking, okay, how can I show them my love, that they're first above everything else? And so I appreciate the reminder today. I always love learning from you, and I will always go to battle with you and for your heart, brother. And
same, right back at you.
And I know this, you have.
We've got this amazing connection because we've been able to be real and authentic with each other and not hide our flaws. And
that's right.
Makes for better connections.
That's right. And this is how I do my best to live in emotional sobriety and to live in the message of my larger story, which is my bigger recovery journey, my purpose in life. So thank you for tuning in today, and more to come on these topics, because they are a part of me, and I think everybody needs to experience these boot camps. And I want to throw out this little public service announcement that I get zero compensation for talking about the boot camps, for presenting at the boot camps, for showing up. In fact, I pay out of my own pocket to help men get to the boot camp, because it's so good. And I just want to make that clear. Maybe in the future I'll be a full-time staff when I'm retired from my day job, but I just love supporting what you guys are doing. And I'm so grateful for the miracles that I've been able to witness in many lives. And I'm going to also end with this tender little moment. There was a time not in November of this year, which is 2025, not last month, but a year ago, I came to boot camp, and it was a couple months after my dad had passed. And right after the fatherlessness session, I wasn't feeling anything in terms of emotion. I was just going into the vow of silence and more in my head. And I saw Duane standing there, and we had a moment where you embraced me, Duane. And that's where I felt the safety and the permission and the release of so many emotions that were bottled up from my dad's passing and missing him and longing for him. And I cried in your arms for minutes, long minutes, which for men to do is a vulnerable place to be. And I love you for that. After that moment, I went to my room, my bunking quarters, and I spent time with God. I reached out to my mom, and technically we're not supposed to be reaching out on our phones, but because I was a volunteer staff, I took permission to call my mom, and we talked for about 2 hours. And I told her about the experience that I had with you, Duane, and we talked about my dad. And it was a way I was in that moment sharing my vulnerability with my mom, and her sharing it with me. We bonded so closely, and I see it like in hindsight, it was a way to battle for her heart as she was grieving and as she was alone. And it was just a very sacred experience that I will never, ever forget.
And it was sacred for me to be there with you and have that experience to cry with you and pray with you. And we all need more of that. Somebody to show up at those times we need it. So thanks for the reminder of that sacred moment for me too.
Amen. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, I love you, Jason.
I love you too. Happy to have you on, and I wish you guys all the best today, and may you go out and battle for your beauties or for your men in your life. Yeah, whoever that is for you.
And just remind your listeners, or I'll remind them, if you look at one of these websites and you want to come to an event and the cost is prohibitive, please look for the link to apply for a scholarship, because we do have, Jason mentioned that we have people that help cover the cost if that cost is prohibitive for you to come. But it's a life-changing experience to come and sit and find a deeper connection with others, but also to just sit and immerse yourself in God's love. We all need more of that.
Amen. Thank you, Duane.
Thanks.
I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this show. Thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing these episodes so that they can help others. This is one way that you can give back and pay it forward, is by just passing along this free information to others that are possibly in need. Share it on social media, share it with your loved ones and family members. And don't forget, you can access my book on Audible, as well as on Amazon or on my website, as well as you can find information about our services at Brickhouse Recovery at brickhouserecovery.com.